Rivers are terrifying. This is the story that made me realize that. After hearing about my friend's experience, I came to fear rivers, so I'm sharing it here. In late August 2008, I took about a week of paid vacation and went back to my family home in Maine for the first time in a while. One day, after finishing a simple job I had helped my uncle, my father's younger brother, with, the two of us headed home by car. It was evening, and although the wind blowing in through the fully opened windows was still heavy with heat, it carried with it the feeling of summer's end, and I remember being filled with a nostalgic mood. As we approached a riverside near my family home, my uncle suddenly said, "Want to stop by?" The riverbank was about a 10-minute drive from my parents' house, but the last time I'd been there was, I think, when I was around 13. Wanting to wash off the sweat and dust, and also out of nostalgia, I immediately agreed. The river had little water, and being a tributary, its clarity went without saying. It was the perfect spot for a short rest. When I was a child, I had once used a rock there as a marker to measure the river's water level for a school science project, and seeing that same rock still there filled me with deep emotion. After washing my face and hands in the water and nostalgically skipping stones, my uncle said, "Someone's coming." When I looked where my uncle indicated, I could faintly see a figure on the opposite shore waving a hand. The figure wasn't that far away, but it was shrouded in a mist-like haze and could only be seen as a shadow. However, I could tell that the figure waving was apparently riding a small boat, coming toward us. The figures appeared to be a pair, and one of them was waving at us. Since the moment my uncle had noticed them, they had been waving directly at us, so I wondered if they might be acquaintances or had some sort of reason to approach. Who could they be? My uncle and I exchanged glances. My uncle didn't seem to recognize them either, but with a puzzled expression, he waved back. Even as they came close to emerging from the haze, they continued waving. As I watched their actions, still wondering who they were, I crouched down and waited for them to come closer. And finally, when they came close enough to be clearly visible, my uncle and I were horrified by their disturbingly eerie identity. The figures who had just been waving and riding a boat toward us were two dolls. Both my uncle and I, embarrassed as we were, screamed like children, yet couldn't take our eyes off them, frozen in place. The one who had been waving looked like a boy doll, dressed in a sailor suit that had faded to pale blue. Its face had likely once been flesh-colored, but the paint had peeled away to white, stained by years of exposure to the wind and rain, and on its lips was peeling vermilion paint once meant as rouge. At its waist hung a saber. The other was a girl doll. Apart from her long hair and old red dress, she was almost identical to the boy doll, and it was clear at a glance that they were a pair. However, there was a large hollow where her left eye should have been, making it look as if the eye was missing. She seemed to be holding something in her arms, but whether it was a ball or a small box I could not be sure. And what I had thought was a small boat turned out to be a large, flat, rectangular tray. As I trembled, unable to look away from them, my uncle noticed something even more abnormal about these eerie dolls and said, "What the hell? They're moving against the flow of the river." The river was flowing up to our right. In other words, the dolls were coming toward us, against the flow of the river. Realizing this, in that instant we couldn't take it anymore, and rushed into the car and fled the riverside. When I cautiously checked the side mirror, the two dolls were slowly drifting away in the direction they should have originally been carried by the current. In the car, my uncle and I confirmed to each other that the dolls had indeed been waving, and we hurried back home. I still do not know what they really were. Could it have been that someone had set them afloat on the river for some kind of ritualistic reason? Even so, dolls waving their hands or moving upstream against the current is beyond understanding. Since then, those dolls have never even appeared in my dreams. But ever since that incident, I haven't been able to go near the river. That's why the memory of that day will never fade.